everyone, it's Stella.
And Tarrant from the Dice Tower.
Thanks for joining us.
Today we'll be teaching you how to play Farms Race, game designed by Daniel Drano, who was one of the co-creators of Cards Against Humanity, with Tom Weiner, and published by Medium Brow Games.
Let's get to it.
Farms Race is a light-hearted Euro-inspired 4X for 3 or 4 players, in which players take on the roles of mutated farm animals, competing against each other and against the humans for control of the world. Players will spread out their influence to gain resources, construct barns, armories, and nukes, and use everything at their disposal to wage war on their opponents. Both inspired by and a parody of the classic Eurogame Catan, the winner will be the first player to 10 victory points, which can be earned by constructing buildings, taking over other players' territories in battle, or winning the arms race by building the most nukes. To set up, lay out the hexes into a board in this shape for 4 players, or this shape for 3 players. For your first game, use the rulebook's recommended layout, which provides balanced access to each resource type. These will be the starting locations in the balanced layouts. Place a random human token on each non-starting position, and leave the rest to the side. Each represents a random number of humans between 1 and 3. Make supplies of the other general components. These are the nuke tokens, victory point tokens, turmoil tokens, spy cards in a face-down shuffled deck, the resource dice, the combat dice, and face-up piles of the 5 types of resource cards: bricks, wood, wheat, weapons, and plutonium. Near the nukes, you can also keep the nukiest tile, a bonus point for whoever builds the most nukes. Each player chooses which animal they'll play, and takes all of its matching pieces: 12 herds, 3 barns, and 2 armories. Shuffle the mutation tiles and deal 2 to each player. It doesn't matter whether these tiles depict your species or not. Now choose a first player and in turn order make the following choices. First, choose which of the 2 mutations you wish to use for the game. These are powerful asymmetrical abilities which will dramatically change the rules for you in one aspect of the game. Then choose your starting hex and on it place 1 barn and 2 herds, flipping those herds over to the uninjured side, which does not show an icon. And then if you're the third player, draw a random resource card into hand. And as the fourth player, draw 2 random resources. Re-roll any question marks that you roll during this selection. Note that while turn order is clockwise, you don't have to choose the starting hex nearest to your seat. You're now ready to play. Farms Race is played in turns, starting from the first player and going clockwise around the table. Your turn is broken up into 4 phases: preparation, actions, resources, and discard. You may also do building at any time on your turn after the preparation phase, except for during combat. In preparation, your buildings produce new herds. In actions, each of your herds may take 1 action, which can either be to heal or to move, possibly triggering conflict with the humans or an opponent. These are resolved with a roll of the dice, and by the end of this phase, every hex will have only a single owner, whether that be a player or the humans. In the resources phase, the active player will roll the resource dice, and all players, whether active or inactive, will gain the matching resources for each matching hex they control. When you build, you'll spend resources from your hand either to construct a building onto the map or to build some other helpful goodies, and you'll end with the discard phase where, if you have more than 7 resource cards in your hand, you must discard down to 7. Farms Race is a race to hold 10 victory points, and the first player to reach 10 points immediately wins the game. There are 4 different ways to score points. Your buildings are worth victory points as long as they are on the map, a barn being worth 1 point and an armory worth 2. If you lose a building from the map, you also lose its points. You gain 1 victory point as long as you hold the nukiest bonus tile. You gain 1 victory point in the form of a victory point token every time you boot another player off one of the territories they control in combat. A point gained in this way can never be taken away from you. Finally, there are 4 spy cards which grant you 1 victory point. If you have any of these, you'll hold them secretly in your hand and then reveal them only when you have enough total points to reach 10. Now we'll look at a turn in detail. The first phase of your turn is preparation, and here each of your buildings, whether it's a barn or an armory, will produce 1 new herd. Take the herd token from your supply and add it to the building's hex on its full health side. You are limited to 12 herd pieces, and if you don't have enough, then you simply add as many as you can. Remember that you can't take a building action until after the preparation phase is complete, meaning any new buildings won't produce a herd until your next turn. The second phase of your turn is actions, and here you may take 1 action with each of your herds on the map. Each of these actions may either be to heal or move. When you heal, you flip the herd over from its wounded side to its full health side. When you move the herd from its current hex to an adjacent hex. If you move to an empty hex or a hex you already control, nothing happens. If you move to a hex controlled by a human or another player, this will initiate combat. If you take a move which initiates combat, you may take multiple moves simultaneously to bring more of your herds into that same combat. You'll then resolve the combat, and depending on the outcome, may be successful or unsuccessful at claiming the hex. You may then continue taking actions with any remaining herds, the only restriction being that you cannot initiate combat in the same hex more than once per turn. So now let's look at how to resolve a combat, and we'll start with a herds versus humans combat. First, reveal the human token if not already. This tells you how many humans are present in that hex. Now, each side will roll combat dice based on how many units they have in the combat. That is, you'll roll 1 die per herd regardless of its health, and the humans will roll 1 die per human. Suppose this was the outcome of the roll. You'll now resolve damages simultaneously. For each gun or human symbol you roll, you will kill 1 human, and you can signify this by removing the token and replacing it with one with the appropriate number. If you kill all humans, remove the token. Humans deal damage to herds only on a gun symbol, so this would count as 2 damage. For each damage, either flip a healthy herd to its wounded side, or return a wounded herd to your supply. Next, the remaining herds have the option to retreat and end the combat. This would mean returning to the location they started at before the move. And if the herds came from multiple hexes, then retreat them in such a way that no hex ends with more herds than it started. But if you choose not to retreat, then you'll do another round of combat in the same way. In this case, the new round would be 2 dice to 1. Continue resolving rounds of rolling or exercising the right to retreat until only one side remains in the hex. Players can enhance their combat capabilities by constructing armories. We'll talk about how to construct them a little bit later, but every time you roll the dice in a round of combat, you add 1 hit for each armory you have anywhere on the board. That means on this roll, the pigs have done enough to wipe out the humans in one go. When you initiate a combat in a hex controlled by another player, then you will combat against that player. The rounds of combat work in much the same way. Each player will roll 1 die for each herd in the battle, and with no humans being present, only gun symbols score a hit. You'll also add 1 hit for each of your armories. This round of combat would count as 3 hits for green and 1 hit for white. After the round of combat, each player has the chance to retreat, starting with the attacker, who, as when fighting humans, must retreat to the location they came from, and then the defender, who, if retreating, must retreat all herds from that hex to a single adjacent hex they control, or if there isn't one, to a single empty adjacent hex. If there were also none of these, then the player must stay and fight to the death. Once the combat is over, if the attacker still has herds in the hex and the defender does not, then the attacker conquers the hex. Any opposing buildings still in that hex are destroyed and returned to that player's supply. Then, at the end of the current turn, if the player still controls the conquered hex, the attacking player gains a victory point token and places a turmoil token onto the hex. As long as that turmoil token remains there, no other player will gain a victory point for conquering that territory. This prevents a third player from getting a cheap victory point by taking over a hex from a battle-wearied army. For example, if the pigs here gained a point for having a long, hard fight against the chickens, this smaller group of cows could still come in and conquer the territory in combat, but because of the turmoil would not get a victory point for doing so. At the start of each of your turns in the preparation phase, remove turmoil from all of your own controlled areas and any neutral areas. In effect, you must hold a hex for an entire round before another player can get a victory point by stealing it from you. Finally, note that advancing on a hex which contains no opposing herds but does contain a building counts as combat, will count as an automatic victory for the player with herds, and results in the distribution of turmoil and victory points in the normal way. The third phase of your turn is resources. You will roll the 2 resource dice, and then each matching hex on the board will activate, granting one of the matching resources to the player who owns it. In this case, it's bricks from each quarry and wood from each forest. So the chickens, who are having the active turn, would gain 1 wood into hand. The sheep would gain 1 brick. The pigs have a very profitable turn, gaining 2 wood and 2 bricks, while the cows get nothing. On a roll of doubles, each of the activated hexes would produce 2 resources instead of 1. On the roll of a question mark, the active player chooses which of the 5 hex types is activated by that question mark. So if the chicken player were to choose the fields to generate wheat, then all other players would also be activating their fields. On the roll of a double question mark, the active player chooses only a single hex type, and then each of those hexes activates twice. Resources are spent for building, and you can build at any point on your turn after the preparations phase is complete, except for during a combat. There are 4 things you can build. For a wood, plutonium, brick, and wheat, you may construct a new barn. Place it on any hex you control which does not already have a building. Here, these are the only options. A barn is worth 1 point as long as it's on the board and produces 1 new herd each preparation phase. For 3 weapons and 2 plutonium, you can upgrade a barn to an armory. Return 1 barn piece to your supply and replace it with an armory. This is worth 2 victory points while it's on the board. It still generates a herd in each preparation phase, and it adds 1 hit to every one of your combat rolls from this point forward. For a wood and a wheat, you can build a spy card. Take the top card from the deck and add it to your hand. You have no limit on spy cards you can hold, and they don't count towards your resource limit. Spy cards are held secretly in your hand until you play them, at which point reveal them, resolve them, and discard them. Unless otherwise stated, the card must be played on your turn and not on the same turn you built it. Many cards will state otherwise. This one can be used at any time. This one can only be used when someone tries to nuke you. As a general exception, a spy card granting a victory point may be revealed immediately when gained, and will usually be revealed only at the point of declaring victory. Finally, for a weapon, a brick and a plutonium, you can construct a nuke. Take a nuke token which should begin flipped to its unexploded side. The first player to do this takes the nukiest tile, granting 1 victory point, and throughout the game this tile will always move to the player who has built the most nukes, whether exploded or unexploded. It won't change hands in the event of a tie. It's only if someone moves to having the single most nukes that they take over the tile. Any time on your turn, you may launch a nuke, flipping it over to its exploded side, targeting any one hex adjacent to a hex you control. All herds or humans in the target hex suffer 1 damage. As such, if you nuke a human's hex, you simply remove the human token. They're all dead. While if you nuke an opponent's hex, any wounded herds are killed and any healthy herds are wounded. Nuking is not considered combat and does no damage to buildings. However, nuclear war can escalate quickly if the target of your nuke also has nuclear capability. That player may now nuke you back as many times as they want, using any nukes they already have, or even by constructing new nukes from resources they already have. That player may target the initiating player in any hex adjacent to a region they control, or adjacent to the hex that was just nuked if they no longer control it. Once again, the retaliating player may nuke the initiating player as many times as they wish. However, after each of those retaliatory nukes, the initiating player may also resolve retaliatory nukes. So, for example, if they had enough nukes, the pigs could nuke the cows could retaliate with 1 nuke against the pigs could retaliate against that nuke, and the cows could launch another 2 nukes back at the pigs. You'll finish your turn with the discard phase, and if you have more than 7 resource cards, you must discard down to 7. Play then passes to the next player, but while it is not your turn, you can continue playing by doing resource trades. There are 2 ways to do this. You can cash in 3 matching resources from your hand for any 1 other resource with the supply. This type of trade can be done either on or off your turn. Your other option is that you can broker trades with any other player who is also not the active player at this time, and you can make resource trades in any combination you wish. This type of trade may only be done off turn for both players. You cannot trade nukes, points, buildings, herds, or spies. And while you can trade in promises for future actions, it's up to you whether those are binding or not. In standard play, the game ends immediately once 1 player has accumulated 10 victory points. That player is the winner. Also be aware that if you are ever wiped entirely off the face of the board, then you are eliminated. Players should once again be reminded that the mutation cards in the game are very powerful individual player powers, likely to give you a really significant advantage in one area of the game. The rules also offer several variants, including long or short versions, variations on trading or stealing resources, and rules for randomized map setup. And that's how to play Farms Race.
Check out the project page of Farms Race. We'll put the link in the description below so you can check it out. And thank you so much for watching. Everything you do will help us. Every single view, every time you like the video. Let us know if you have any questions and comments, and see you next time.